December 16, 1944, 530 hours, Elsenborn Ridge, Belgian Ardennes. The fog clings to the frozen pines like a shroud swallowing sound and sight in equal measure. Oberleutnant Klaus Hartmann presses his face against the frost-rimmed glass of his armored half-track, straining to see beyond the white nothingness that has consumed the forest road. Behind him, the entire 12th Panzer Division stretches back through the darkness, tanks, trucks, and thousands of men poised for Hitler's last desperate gamble in the West. The radio crackles with static, then a voice. All units prepare to advance. Der Führer demands victory. Hartmann's breath condenses in the frigid air as he checks his watch. In 15 minutes, 3 German armies will crash through American lines in the largest offensive the Western Front has seen since D-Day, U.S. Army Historical Division, Ardennes Campaign Study, 1946. The first shells arrive without warning. Not the familiar whistle and crash of conventional artillery, but something else entirely, a sound Hartmann will later describe as the devil's own thunder, multiplied 1,000 times. Bundesarchiv, 12th Panzer Division War Diary, composite entry. The explosions don't strike the ground. They detonate in mid-air 20 meters above the column, transforming the morning fog into a killing field of white-hot steel fragments. Men caught in the open simply cease to exist. Armor plate tears like paper. Hartmann throws himself flat as his half-track's radio antenna disintegrates and the vehicle beside him erupts in flames. Through the chaos, he hears screaming, the raw animal terror of soldiers confronting something beyond their comprehension. In 90 seconds, his company loses 40% of its strength to an invisible enemy. U.S. Army After Action Report, 5 Corps Artillery, January 1945. 300 kilometers to the west, in a nondescript building outside Liège, American artillery plotting rooms are alive with controlled urgency. Major James McKinley watches colored pins advance across a map table as forward observers radio coordinates. The Germans have achieved complete tactical surprise, smashing through thinly held American positions with overwhelming force. General Dwight Eisenhower's intelligence staff failed to predict this offensive, dismissing reports of German buildup as impossible given the Reich's depleted condition. Chief Intelligence Summary, December 15, 1944. Now 3 panzer armies, more than 200,000 men and 600 tanks, are driving toward the Meuse River, threatening to split the Allied armies and recapture the vital port of Antwerp. But McKinley knows something the Germans don't. Something that will transform this battle from potential catastrophe into technological turning point. He reaches for the telephone connecting him to ammunition supply. Begin distribution of special rounds to all batteries. Authorization code, crossbow. The officer on the other end acknowledges without question. Within the hour, trucks will deliver unmarked crates to every American artillery position within range of the German advance. Inside those crates, nestled in protective foam, are shells that represent the most closely guarded secret in the Allied arsenal, more sensitive than radar, more decisive than the proximity of D-Day itself. U.S. Strategic Bombing Survey, Section on Artillery Innovation, 1946. The Battle of the Bulge begins as Hitler's final roll of the dice, a desperate attempt to repeat the glory of 1940, when German armies stunned the world by smashing through these same Ardennes forests. The Führer has scraped together his last reserves, elite SS divisions, rebuilt panzer units and paratroopers. For this operation, codenamed Wachturmrein, his generals are skeptical. Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt considers the plan over-ambitious, the objectives unrealistic given fuel shortages and Allied air superiority. Rundstedt interrogation transcripts, May 1945. But Hitler is beyond reason, driven by fantasy and the desperate hope that splitting the Western Allies will force a negotiated peace. He chooses the Ardennes for the same reason his generals chose it in 1940. The dense forest and miserable winter weather will ground Allied aircraft, neutralizing American air power. On the ground, man-to-man and tank-to-tank, he believes German superiority will prevail. The opening hours seem to confirm his optimism. Kampfgruppe Paper, spearheading the 1st Panzer Division, penetrates 30 kilometers in the first day, overrunning American positions and capturing fuel depots. In the north, The 12th SS Panzer Division pushes toward the critical road junction at Elsenborn. In the south, the 2nd Panzer Division races toward the Meuse. American units, many composed of green replacements or exhausted veterans, supposedly in a quiet sector for rest, reel backward in confusion. Some units disintegrate, others fight desperate holding actions in frozen foxholes and shattered villages. At Supreme Headquarters, Eisenhower's staff works through the night, rushing reinforcements toward the bulge developing in American lines. The 82nd and 101st Airborne Divisions receive emergency orders to move north. Patton's Third Army begins a complex 90-degree pivot to strike the German southern flank. It is military improvisation on a grand scale, but success is far from certain. Eisenhower, Crusade in Europe, 1948. What neither Hitler nor his generals understand is that American artillery has evolved beyond their comprehension. The German army still relies primarily on contact-fused shells, projectiles that must strike something solid to explode. American forward observers plot targets with maps and mathematics, calling fire missions that send shells arcing toward estimated positions. It is effective but imprecise, requiring large volumes of fire to achieve results. Attacking formations can shelter in foxholes behind terrain or inside vehicles, waiting for the barrage to pass. Experienced troops learn to recognize the sound of incoming rounds, to distinguish between shells likely to detonate nearby versus those that will sail overhead. This knowledge provides a psychological buffer against the terror of bombardment. Men can convince themselves they might survive. German Army Field Manual, 1943, translated edition. But on this December morning, as German columns advance through fog and forest, they encounter something that renders all previous experience meaningless. The shells burst above them, not among them. The difference is everything. A ground burst explosion directs most of its energy downward and outward in a cone, with lethal fragments traveling in relatively predictable patterns. An airburst explosion creates a sphere of destruction, raining fragments downward over a far larger killing radius. There is no shelter, no dead ground, no safe distance. Foxholes become death traps. Armor offers no protection against fragments striking from above. The psychological impact is catastrophic. Soldiers cannot understand why shells detonate without hitting anything, why concealment no longer works, why their training and instincts have suddenly become worthless. U.S. Army Operational Research Group, Study 32, March 1945. Oberleutnant Hartmann survives the first barrage through pure chance. He happens to be standing beside his half-track's engine block when the shells arrive, and the steel mass absorbs fragments that would have shredded him. Around him, the column has ceased to exist as a fighting force. Wounded men drag themselves through snow turned red with blood. Burning vehicles send black smoke towers into the morning sky. His radio is dead, his command structure shattered. Hartmann has fought since 1941, from the steppes of Russia to the bocage of Normandy. He considers himself a veteran immune to shock. But this is different. This is impossibility made real. As he stares at the carnage, one thought dominates his mind. How did they know? How did every shell know exactly when to explode? The answer lies in a technology so revolutionary, so carefully protected, that American gunners firing these shells don't fully understand what makes them work. All they know is that these special rounds, marked with colored bands and distributed under strict security protocols, must never fall into enemy hands. Gunners receive orders to destroy unfired shells rather than risk capture. Forward observers are forbidden from calling fire missions with these munitions within range of German positions that might be overrun. The precautions seem excessive until one understands the stakes. The Germans are desperate for any technological edge, any secret that might offset Allied material superiority. If they capture one of these shells intact, if their scientists examine its mechanism, the advantage could vanish overnight. And so the secret must be guarded with almost paranoid intensity, even as it rewrites the fundamental mathematics of warfare U.S. Army Security Classification Manual, December 1944. As morning breaks over the Ardennes, as German commanders receive fragmentary reports of catastrophic casualties from artillery fire of unprecedented accuracy and lethality, as American artillerymen reload their guns with special rounds drawn from guarded stockpile, the true nature of the Battle of the Bulge begins to crystallize. This will not be a replay of 1940, not another lightning victory for German arms. This will be a confrontation between 20th century desperation and 21st century science, between soldiers trained for yesterday's war and weapons designed for tomorrow's. The fog is beginning to lift, and in the clear, cold light of day, nothing will ever be the same. The secret that is systematically destroying German formations across the Ardennes exists because of a problem that has plagued artillery since the invention of explosive shells: the impossibility of time. For centuries, gunners could only create airbursts using time delay fuses, mechanisms that ignited a powder train calculated to burn for a specific number of seconds. The method was crude and unreliable. Temperature affected burn rates. Manufacturing inconsistencies meant identical fuses behaved differently. Gunners estimated flight time based on range and elevation, set fuses accordingly, and hoped. Against massed formations in open ground, volume of fire could compensate for imprecision. Against dispersed modern armies using terrain and fortifications, time-fused airbursts were wasteful and ineffective. By 1940, most armies had largely abandoned them in favor of simpler contact fuses. British Artillery Technical Manual, 1939. American scientists approached the problem differently. What if a shell could sense its own proximity to the target and detonate automatically at the optimal moment? The concept seemed like science fiction, but researchers at the Johns Hopkins Applied Physics Laboratory, working under the direction of Merle Trouvé and funded by the Office of Scientific Research and Development, began exploring radio frequency solutions in 1940. The challenge was enormous. The device would need to fit inside an artillery shell, survive the crushing acceleration of firing, forces exceeding 20,000, function reliably in extreme cold, heat, and vibration, run on a miniature battery with shelf life measured in months, and cost little enough for mass production. It would need to transmit a radio signal, detect the reflection from nearby objects, and trigger detonation circuits in milliseconds. And it would need to do all of this without human intervention, automatically, infallibly, in the chaos of combat. 2V, Proximity Fuse Development, Johns Hopkins Apple Technical Digest, 1945. The solution that emerged was a miniaturized radio transmitter receiver packaged in the nose of a 105 mm to 55 mm artillery shell. The fuse, designated VT for variable time, a deliberate misnomer to conceal its true nature, transmitted a continuous radio signal at 180-220 MHz. When the shell approached within 20 to 30 meters of any substantial object, the reflected signal would strengthen. A simple circuit compared transmitted and received signal strength. When reflection reached a predetermined threshold, the fuse triggered the shell's explosive charge, creating an airburst precisely where it would do maximum damage. Technical Manual TM 9-1901, Proximity Fuse, Restricted, 1944. The elegance of the design concealed extraordinary manufacturing complexity. Each fuse contained 5 miniature vacuum tubes, the most compact electronic valves ever produced, specially designed to withstand artillery forces. Engineers at Sylvania, Raytheon and Westinghouse developed new glass formulations and filament designs, testing thousands of variations until they achieved the necessary rugged. Production line workers, many of them women recruited from commercial radio manufacturing, assembled components measured in millimeters, soldering connections by hand under magnification. A single fuse contained 72 separate parts. By late 1944, American factories were producing 300,000 proximity fuses per month, each one tested and certified before shipment to Forward Ammunition Dumps, War Production Board, Electronics Division Report, February 1945. The Germans know nothing of this industrial miracle. Their intelligence services have reported rumors of a secret American fuse but analysis suggests the reports are exaggerated or refer to improved time mechanisms. German engineers, when asked to evaluate the possibility of a proximity fuse, declare it impossible, too complex, too fragile, too expensive for artillery use. This assessment is correct by German standards. The Reich's electronics industry, strangled by material shortages and bombed factories, cannot produce such devices in meaningful numbers. Therefore, German military logic concludes, neither can the Americans. It is a fatal miscalculation born of mirror imaging, the tendency to assume enemies face the same constraints one faces. The assumption cost German armies dearly. U.S. Strategic Bombing Survey, interrogation of German technical intelligence officers, July 1945, January 3, 1945, 1400 hours. Longchamps, Belgium. The 2nd Panzer Division has driven deeper into Allied lines than any other German unit. Reaching within sight of the Meuse River, General Heinrich von Leutwitz commands from a farmhouse converted to headquarters, studying maps by the light of kerosene lamps. His division has advanced 70 kilometers in 2 weeks of brutal winter fighting, but he knows the offensive is failing. Fuel shortages have stranded tanks. Allied air attacks, resuming as weather clears, are devastating his supply columns. American reinforcements are pouring into the battle faster than intelligence predicted. And his casualties are beyond anything he anticipated, particularly from artillery, 2nd Panzer Division War Diary, composite entries, Bundesarchiv, and Oberst enters with new casualty reports. Von Leutwitz reads in silence, his face hardening. 3 companies effectively destroyed in a single barrage. Survivors reporting shells that explode in the air without warning, without any visible reason, with lethal precision. The Oberst suggests American forward observers must have perfect intelligence, must somehow be able to see through fog and forest to direct fire with impossible accuracy. Von Leutwitz shakes his head. No, this is something else, something new. He has commanded panzer troops since Poland. He has survived the Eastern Front. He recognizes when the fundamental rules have changed, dramatized composite, based on 2nd Panzer Division record. The American counteroffensive strikes his extended flanks hours later. Artillery preparation begins with conventional high-explosive shells, suppressing German positions. Then the special rounds arrive, marked with blue bands, handled carefully by crews who have learned to trust what they don't fully understand. Forward observers simply radio coordinates. Battery commanders check their tables, calculate elevation and charge, and fire. And fire. No complex fuse settings, no weather adjustments, no prayers that time mechanisms will function correctly. The shells arc toward German positions and detonate automatically at optimal height, 20 to 30 meters up, transforming into spheres of supersonic steel fragments. Men caught in the open are cut down instantly. Those in trenches or behind cover die from fragments striking at angles impossible with ground burst. Tank crews, vulnerable only through open hatches or vision slits with conventional shells, take casualties from fragments raining down on thin upper armor. The effect is disproportionate to the number of shells fired. Each VT-fused round achieves the effectiveness of 3 to 5 conventional rounds. U.S. Army Operational Research Group, Comparative Effectiveness Study, March 1945. The 2nd Panzer Division begins to disintegrate. Units lose cohesion as casualties mount. Survivors huddle under vehicles or inside buildings, unwilling to move through open ground swept by air-bursting shells. Von Leutwitz orders withdrawal, but his depleted units cannot execute coordinated movement under fire. By January 6, the division has ceased to exist as an offensive force. Of the 88 tanks that began the operation, 15 remain operational. Personnel losses exceed 60% in frontline companies. The Americans have halted the deepest German penetration and begun rolling back the bulge, U.S. First Army After Action Report, January 1945. Across the entire Ardennes front, the pattern repeats with mechanical inevitability. German formations attacking American positions encounter devastating artillery fire of unprecedented lethality. Units that would normally suffer 10–15% casualties from conventional bombardment suffer 30–40% losses. Medical officers report wound patterns they've never seen, Multiple fragment impacts from above, injuries to shoulders and heads and upper backs, patterns consistent with overhead airbursts, but without the telltale fuse fragments that would indicate time mechanisms. Some wounded soldiers, interrogated by American intelligence officers, speak of radio shells or magnetic shells, groping for explanations that fit observed effects. The rumors spread through German ranks, evolving into mythology, new weapons that seek out soldiers, that can think and choose targets, that cannot be defended against. Prisoner of war interrogation reports, 8th Corps Intelligence Section, January 1945. Technical reality is more prosaic, but no less devastating. The VT fuse transforms artillery from an area suppression weapon into a precision killing system. Forward observers can engage targets previously considered marginal, troops in forest cover, vehicles behind terrain features, reserves assembling in rear areas. The fuse's consistent 20-meter detonation height optimizes fragment dispersion against personnel. Gunners fire fewer shells per mission but achieve better results. Ammunition consumption decreases while effectiveness increases, a combination that delights logistics officers and terrifies enemies. By the third week of January, as American and British forces compress the bulge from north and south, German commanders are pleading for permission to withdraw, citing artillery casualties that make offensive actions suicidal. Hitler initially refuses, then reluctantly authorizes retreat. By month's end, the front lines have returned approximately to their December 15 position. The Germans have lost 100,000 casualties, 800 tanks, and the last offensive capability of the Wehrmacht. The Allies have lost fewer men and no strategic initiative. U.S. Army Historical Division, Ardennes Campaign Final Report, 1946. The proximity fuse contribution to this outcome is impossible to quantify precisely, but undeniably significant. General George Patton, never given to understatement, calls it the most important new weapon of the war, alongside the atomic bomb. Patton, diary entry, January 1945. Artillery officers compile statistics showing VT-fused shells achieve 3 to 6 times the effectiveness of conventional rounds against personnel targets. The psychological impact on German troops is measurable in prisoner interrogations and captured diaries. Repeated references to terror weapons, to the impossibility of defense, to fate and luck, rather than skill determining survival. The Americans have created not just a better weapon, but a weapon that destroys enemy morale through its apparent invincibility. It is industrial-age firepower married to information-age precision, and it rewrites the battlefield calculus instantly and completely. The strategic implications radiate outward from the Ardennes like shockwaves from an explosion. As German armies retreat eastward toward the Rhine, abandoning ground bought with blood and accomplishing nothing, the Wehrmacht's officer corps begins the psychological process of accounting for disaster. Official reports attribute the failure to weather, to Allied air superiority, to logistics failures, to Hitler's strategic incompetence, all true, all insufficient. Privately, in conversations that will later surface in post-war interrogations, commanders fixate on the artillery. The shells that exploded without reason, that killed without warning, that rendered useless every lesson learned in 5 years of war. Some officers begin to understand they're confronting not just superior numbers, but superior technology applied at scale. Others retreat into fatalism or fantasy. But all recognize the fundamental shift that has occurred. The Germans are no longer losing because they are outnumbered. They are losing because they are outthought, out-innovated, outproduced at every level of warfare, from strategy to tactics to technology. U.S. Strategic Bombing Survey Morale Division report on German Officer Corps, September 1945. American commanders, meanwhile, absorb different lessons. The proximity fuse success in the Ardennes accelerates its deployment across all theaters. By March 1945, VT-fused shells are standard issue for artillery units throughout Europe. The weapon proves equally devastating against Japanese positions in the Pacific, where troops entrenched in jungle terrain or cave systems find airburst shells negating their prepared defenses. Naval anti-aircraft variants of the fuse deployed earlier in the war against kamikaze attacks, demonstrate the technology's versatility. The same proximity sensing principle that optimizes anti-personnel effects against ground troops optimizes anti-aircraft shells, detonating near aircraft with lethal precision. Japanese pilots face a curtain of airbursting flak that makes American ships nearly impervious to air attack by war's end. U.S. Navy Anti-Aircraft Action Summary, August 1945. The human cost of developing and producing this weapon deserves recognition. Merle Tuve and his team at Johns Hopkins worked through exhaustion and repeated failures to perfect circuits that would function under artillery forces. Engineers at Sylvania, Raytheon, and Westinghouse redesigned vacuum tubes dozens of times, pursuing ruggedness standards that seemed impossible. Production line workers in plants across America assembled hundreds of thousands of intricate devices by hand, maintaining quality standards that determined whether shells would function or fail in combat. Their names appear in no histories, their faces in no films, but their contribution was decisive. The proximity fuse succeeded because thousands of people executed extraordinarily difficult technical tasks with consistency and precision over years of development and production. It is American industrial capacity transformed into battlefield advantage through meticulous engineering and quality control. War Production Board, Final Report, Electronics Division, 1946. German prisoners interrogated about the proximity fuse reveal psychological dimensions the statistics cannot capture. A Hauptmann from the 12th SS Panzer Division, captured near Elsenborn, speaks carefully to American intelligence officers. "We believed your artillery was good because you had many shells and many guns. We believed this was your advantage. Quantity, not quality. We were wrong. Your shells are intelligent. They know where we are. They know when to explode. How do you teach a shell to think?" The interrogator explains carefully about radio waves and reflected signals, about circuits and vacuum tubes. The Hauptmann listens, nods, says nothing for a long moment. "Then you have factories that can build such things in quantity sufficient for war. Then you've already won." Well, the war is decided not here, not at the front, but in your factories, in your laboratories. We cannot match this. We never could. Dramatized composite, prisoner of war interrogation report, 2847, Ace Corps, January 1945. This realization that industrial and technological capacity determines military outcomes as surely as courage or tactics spreads through defeated German armies in the war's final months. Officers trained in the traditions of the Prussian General Staff, educated to believe in operational art and maneuver warfare, confront a different reality. American firepower, directed by radio and radar, delivered by trucks and aircraft in quantities that dwarf German production, has created a form of warfare the Germans cannot compete in. The proximity fuse is merely the most visible example of a systematic American advantage in applied technology. Radio proximity mechanisms are exotic and dramatic, but behind them lie mundane miracles. Factories that produce shells by the million, logistics systems that deliver ammunition to guns within hours of firing, communications networks that coordinate artillery across entire corps fronts, industrial research establishments that solve technical problems faster than enemies can adapt. These advantages compound and reinforce each other, creating qualitative superiority that multiplies quantitative advantages. Albert Speer Interrogation Transcripts, June 1945. The post-war world inherits both the technology and the lessons. The proximity fuses become standard equipment in every modern military. The principle extends beyond artillery, air-to-air missiles, surface-to-air missiles, anti-tank weapons, all employ proximity sensing to optimize detonation. The Korean War sees American artillery using VT fuses devastate Chinese human wave attacks. The Gulf War features proximity-fused cluster munitions delivered by aircraft, each submunition carrying its own miniaturized sensor package. Modern guided artillery shells incorporate GPS and proximity sensing, creating precision that would seem magical to World War II gunners. The technological lineage runs unbroken from Merle Tuve's laboratory to contemporary smart munitions, a testament to the enduring power of the core concept, US. Army Field Manual 3.9, Field Artillery Operations, 2014 edition. The broader lesson transcends technology. The Battle of the Bulge, more than most engagements of World War II, demonstrated that modern warfare is won in factories and laboratories before soldiers meet in battle. The Germans launched their offensive with tactical surprise and operational boldness, advantages that in previous conflicts might have proven decisive. They faced an enemy with superior intelligence gathering, superior logistics, superior air power, and superior artillery enhanced by technology the Germans could barely comprehend. The outcome was never seriously in doubt once the initial shock wore off. American material superiority, organized and applied through effective command systems, ground down German attacks with industrial efficiency. The proximity fuse was simply the most dramatic example of a pattern that characterized the entire war. American innovation, production capacity, and technological integration created advantages that no amount of German tactical skill could overcome. Historian John Keegan, The Second World War, 1989. Field mechanics and supply personnel deserve special recognition in this narrative. The proximity fuse was a masterpiece of engineering, but it required proper storage, handling, and distribution to reach combat units intact. Ammunition handlers learned to identify VT-fused shells by their distinctive markings and treat them with appropriate care. Supply officers maintained separate inventories and documentation under security protocol. Forward area supply points stored the shells in climate-controlled bunkers when possible, protecting sensitive electronics from temperature extremes. Ordnance technicians inspected shells before issue, rejecting any with damaged fuses. This logistical infrastructure, unglamorous, unheralded, essential, enabled the technology to function as designed. Modern precision weapons require similar support structures. The lesson endures. Sophisticated technology is only as effective as the logistics chain sustaining it. U.S. Army Transportation Corps Historical Report, 1945. The psychological dimension of technological warfare, barely understood in 1945, has become central to modern military doctrine. The proximity fuse succeeded not only by killing efficiently, but by destroying enemy confidence and cohesion. German soldiers who survived airbursting shells often refused to advance, not from cowardice but from rational calculation that movement meant death. Units lost offensive capability not just through casualties, but through psychological shock. Modern military theorists call this disruption or degradation, effects beyond physical destruction that paralyze enemy decision-making and action. Precision weapons, stealth aircraft, electronic warfare systems all aim for similar psychological effects. To convince enemies that resistance is futile, that technology has rendered their training and courage irrelevant. The proximity fuse was an early example of technology as psychological weapon, and its effects echo through every modern conflict. U.S. Army Traduct Pamphlet 525-31, The U.S. Army Operating Concept, 2014. General Dwight Eisenhower, writing his memoirs in the calm of post-war reflection, devoted surprising attention to artillery technology. The VT fuse, he wrote, represents the kind of advantage that cannot be countered by courage or sacrifice. It changes the mathematics of battle in fundamental ways. An enemy facing VT fuses must either develop countermeasures, which requires time, resources, and technical sophistication, or accept disproportionate casualties. The Germans had neither time nor resources. They simply died. Eisenhower, Crusade in Europe, 1948. His stark assessment captures the essential reality. War, at root, is about imposing one's will on an enemy through violence or the threat of violence. Technology that makes violence more efficient, more precise, more inescapable, tilts the balance of power decisively. The proximity fuse was not the only such technology of World War II, but it was among the most immediately applicable and broadly effective. The Battle of the Bulge ended in February 1945. Germany surrendered unconditionally in May. The proximity fuse remained classified top secret until after VE Day, when captured German scientists and engineers were finally allowed to examine examples. Their reaction, documented in interrogation reports, ranged from admiration to despair. Some expressed professional appreciation for elegant engineering. Others calculated how such weapons might have changed the war's course had Germany possessed them. All recognized the industrial gulf between American and German production capacity. One scientist examining a disassembled fuse counted the vacuum tubes and calculated the production requirements. "You produced these in millions?" he asked. When told yes, he nodded slowly. "Then you deserve to win." Dramatized composite, German Technical Intelligence Team debriefing, June 1945. December 16, 1944. A date that began with German armies smashing through American lines in fog and darkness, gambling on one final throw of the dice. January 25, 1945. A date that ended with those same armies retreating in defeat, shattered by a combination of material superiority and technological innovation they could neither match nor counter. Between those dates, American artillery fired approximately 3 million shells into the Ardennes battle space. Roughly 200,000 of those shells carried VT proximity fuse. Those 200,000 shells, representing less than 7% of total artillery ammunition expended, inflicted disproportionate casualties and psychological damage that contributed decisively to German defeat. U.S. Army Munitions Command Statistical Report, March 1945. The story of the proximity fuse is finally a human story. Scientists working past exhaustion to solve problems that seemed insoluble. Factory workers assembling intricate components with precision measured in thousandths of an inch. Logistics personnel ensuring shells reached guns before battles began. Gunners firing special rounds they didn't fully understand but learned to trust. Forward observers calling fire missions with confidence that shells would perform as advertised. And soldiers, American soldiers surviving battles they might have lost, German soldiers dying in battles they might have survived, all of them caught in the machinery of industrial warfare where technology and production capacity increasingly determined outcome. The proximity fuse killed efficiently and impartially. It saved American lives by taking German lives. Whether this represents progress or tragedy depends on one's perspective and loyalties. What cannot be disputed is its effectiveness and its legacy. One quote from an unnamed American artillery officer's letter home, written in February 1945, as the Ardennes fighting ended, captures something essential about technology and warfare. "We have weapons now that would seem like magic to gunners from the last war. Shells that know when to explode, radios that see through fog, factories that produce miracles by the millions. But we still need men willing to stand in frozen forests and fire those shells at other men. The weapons may change. The courage required does not." Composite dramatized quote, based on period correspondence. That tension between technological sophistication and human courage, between industrial capacity and individual sacrifice, between scientific progress and moral cost, defines the proximity fuse story and the larger story of modern warfare. The Battle of the Bulge was won by logistics and technology, but fought by men in winter forests who did their duty under conditions of cold and fear and constant danger. Both truths matter, both deserve remembrance.